Growth Pains.
Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to this new episode of Growth Pains. Today we'll be talking about pains such as delegating effectively, allocating resources wisely, struggling with product market fit, and achieving consistent results at different companies. Today my guest is Asia Orangio. Asia is an early stage SaaS growth consultant. She does this through her company called DemandMaven. And she also recently joined Moz as their newest board member, taking on a seat that Rand Fishkin previously held. So thank you for joining me today, Asia. Great to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super pumped to get real open and honest and transparent about what we're about to talk about today.
as crazy as it is, like you don't get enough opportunities to do that these days, huh? There's a lot of yeah.
Surprisingly enough, I mean, I think there's certainly a layer of honesty and transparency behind closed doors. But I think when it comes to just in the global landscape of startup and SaaS and growth,
this is something I love from consultants. Sorry to interrupt. I love from consultants because there's this unattachment to like an employer that allows you to be so much more open than when you have somebody from your company like listening, right? And most people I've had here have been able to open.
Exactly.
But there's always a bit of a concern when you work for a company. It's always tricky.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm ironically enough, it doesn't happen, I think, as often enough and publicly enough. But that's, I think, why we're talking today.
Cool. Let's get started with a little section I do at the beginning, which is a true or false. So in this one, I'll just give you a short statement and you let me know what you think. There's no halfways. You cannot dodge the question. You have to kind of like commit to something. Let's see how it goes. So the first one is funding amount and growth rate are directly proportional. True or false?
Funding amount and growth rate are directly proportional.
By that, I mean, as one increases, the other one increases at the same rate.
Oh, absolutely false. Has nothing to do with your growth rate at all.
It's a common perception, right? That the money will unavoidably make you grow. And I guess we all have seen 𝐸𝐽𝐵 recently as an example of that not being the case, right? I know it's been a big topic in social media and everything, but yeah, it happens, right? You can have the best players, the best money, and still not make it.
Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, infinite money does not a successful business make. It's just not... it's just burning cash in the front yard to me. But yeah, no. 𝐸𝐽𝐵 is a perfect example. But yes.
Yeah, it's tricky. Okay, second one. Most founders believe that rapid growth will come from marketing, when in fact it comes from every department being fine-tuned and well-aligned.
I actually just recently wrote about this, and I actually think okay, so is the question if founders believe that?
Yes. True or false?
True. It's definitely true. And a lot of what I come in and do is educate about how it's got to be firing on all cylinders. Like it's not just marketing doing all of the heavy lifting. It's the same problem of you could be doing all the marketing and converting literally no one at the bottom of the funnel. So yes, I definitely think that's true.
Okay, definitely agree on that one. Then we have the next one. There are no such things as silver bullets when it comes to growing a business. True or false?
That's definitely true. No such thing as silver bullets. And yet we would love for there to be one.
Yeah, it's human nature, right?
Oh, totally human nature. There's got to be this one thing I can do to fix my problem. And it's so rarely ever just one thing.
Yeah, true. I think recently I read Andrew Chen writing about it. It was refreshing because you need some of the rock stars to come out and say it as well for people to be like, okay, then I guess it's true. Otherwise, it sounds like excuses from a bad marketer, right? When you just say it and nobody knows who you are. The next one is companies listen more to consultants than their own staff. True or false?
Companies listen more to consultants than their own staff. I'm going to have to say, okay, this is just from my personal experience. I'm going to have to say... I think it's true, but I think for smaller companies, I do actually think it's false, but just because they just don't have, they might not necessarily have the talent to come in and tell them.
Yeah.
Or they might not necessarily have someone with that experience to come in and tell them. Sometimes I'm actually the first marketer that they've ever worked with. Most of the time, actually, I'm the first marketer ever to come in and do anything for them. So I think with the kinds of clients that I work with, I don't know, I kind of consider it to be false. I think if they had the internal talent, they would. But my personal in-house experience, I would say that is true.
Exactly. It's both sides of the curve, right? Like you feel a little bit like, because I can imagine sometimes you advise something and then the in-house person will be like, yeah, I've been saying that for months.
Right.
And only when you came in, it's like, we should do this. Great idea. Right? So I think we all have seen, but it's good because you say as an in-house marketer, I think it's true, but as a consultant, I think it's false. And I guess it shows the both perspectives, right? Where you're standing. So,
yeah.
Okay, super cool. Let's go into the icebreaker question that I ask every people in the podcast. So it is, let's start with one thing that you are really, really tremendously bad at that you can share with the audience.
This one, like as soon as you asked, I was just like, oh, it's definitely email. Like not like email copywriting marketing wise, far more on the managing my own inbox. Hands down, the bane of my existence. Hate doing it, even though it's critical to my success. I'm the kind of person who gets back to people in like 3 to 4 business days. I'm not the like, so Rand, for example, if you ever email Rand back and forth, he's like, oh, instant. Like within 10 minutes, I'm going to get a reply back.
Yeah.
A complete machine. Yeah. And I'm very much the opposite. I'm like, I will drag my feet for as long as humanly possible on email.
Pin it and just wait for another day to get back to it.
I tell Superhuman to remind me in a couple of days, and I get to it when I get to it. There are certainly some scenarios where it's like, no, I have to be on top of this and I have to be instant, but it is draining for me. I'm not going to lie. Like it is, it's tough, but such a
no. But this is go ahead. There's a little lag there.
Oh no! I was gonna say such a whiny thing to be like, oh, email. Like I'm a business owner, I have to do email, but I do really dislike it as just as much as I can minimize the amount that I have to do it. I love it, but
this is still a very new podcast. But so far, this is probably the one I guess have told that I can most relate to. I am really, really bad at it. And I think the proliferation of like the Slacks of the world have only made me worse at it, because I feel like all of the important stuff from a teammate or something is coming through Slack, and I keep a really like close eye on that. And then email, I just get like 90% outbound and the occasional renewal of a tool or something like that. So I just developed the habit lately of just like getting really bad at it as well. So I've been changing email clients, trying to sort it out. I'm not there yet. So glad to hear you're on the same page, because I emailing with Rand, for example, as well. I had very low self-esteem about my own email skills. He replies instantly. It's like WhatsApping him. Okay, yes. So here we go. Pain number 1, and that we're going to discuss today, which is delegating effectively. Right? I think it's a common consensus that to be a great leader and to get, results, you have to delegate. There's just no way around it. And you mentioned that this is one of your struggles. So I wonder, what do you think this is? Because some people delegate because you worry that they won't meet the deadlines, or you think that they'll drop the ball and you'll have to do it anyways at the end of the day, or maybe that it would take longer to explain it than to do it yourself. What are the main reasons this becomes a problem for you?
It's interesting because it's been, delegation has been the ultimate umbrella, but the theme of delegation and the challenge that I've overcome with it those challenges have actually evolved over time. So when I first started DemandMaven, I was the only person in the business working on projects. And it became very clear that as I took on more clients, and also as I learned more, my energy levels would just tank. Like I was getting to this place where I was the sole executor / strategist, and also the project manager for all of these clients and projects. And then on top of all of that, I've got things to take care of for the business. And so the first hurdle was, can I delegate? Like, can I even, is there a way that I can ultimately delegate anything I do to anybody else? And the mental and like psychological things that were happening there were really all around can anybody execute this as well as I can? Because I'm able to do this in 15 minutes, but paying someone else to do it might take them 2 to 3 hours. And am I going to be okay with that? And then I'm going to have to manage them and manage their expectations. And there was lots of like conflicting emotions and thoughts and feelings about all of that. And the more that I, well, one, worked with my business coach, and then also the more that I actually started to test the waters, the more that I realized that so much of delegation ultimately came down to how I package tasks and how I package projects. And also, how strong is my operational arm in the business? So before, in the very early days of DemandMaven, there were very little operations when it came to like what are our standard processes and what are our standard procedures for how we execute things, because it was all me, like there wasn't really a need for it. But as it became very painfully clear that there was no way that I was going to be able to, well, I don't want to say there was no way. It was just there was no way I could sustain the way that we were currently operating at the time and still also be sane and happy. Yeah. Like I was gonna have to delegate in order to just seek a certain level of just happiness within the business. I would be working 100 hours a week otherwise. Yeah. And that hurdle, I don't want to say I quickly overcame it. I'm not gonna lie. It took me like a solid, like I would say 2 years before I ever got to a place to where I was really confident about delegating. And that was because actually of this year, we focused 100% on operations and processes inside of the business. So that way, when I take on contractors and freelancers now, there's a very specific onboarding process. All of our tasks and projects are documented in terms of how we execute things. But now that so we overcame the first delegation monster, if you will. The second one is, so now I actually have a team of people. They're executing on things. We've got processes in place. Like we're doing the thing, and it's relatively painless for me. Now my biggest challenge is honestly, it's me again. Yeah. But now it's much more like the nuance has shifted into when we do really specific kinds of tasks. I still have a lot of knowledge in my head that I just haven't translated into something that my team can ultimately use. And a lot of it is the really strategic stuff that we take for granted that we think is really easy and fast. But for someone else coming in new, it's actually really challenging and they have to like do a lot of guessing and figuring it out. Things like, I'll give you an example, translating product knowledge into marketing value propositions, or taking a client's product feature set and translating that into how does this make a difference in the market for their customers, and having someone else do that when they don't have a whole lot of context and like background info and just knowledge that I have because I'm working with these clients every single week. How do I transfer that? And so knowledge transfer now on some of the more strategic, harder things delegate, that's where I'm at now. And so we've come up with a few ways to solve this, but it's still very painful, but just because we're kind of having to test like a lot of different ways on how to get this done. And then also there's even more nuance when it comes to certain marketing tactics and things that we do for our clients. Copywriting is one of them. But copywriting is it's such a huge umbrella, like copywriting for email versus landing pages versus sales letters. It's
also so personal, huh? Yeah, like if you have a style, you cannot just like get that from anybody you outsource it to. It comes with you.
And so a lot of what I am learning as an owner, but then also as basically I'm essentially a marketing manager too. So what I'm kind of learning is how can I set up my team, who I do consistently work with over time? How do I set my team up for the most success so that way they don't have to like do any guessing about what needs to be done for the client? They have all the resources and templates and things that they can use to do good work, but that doesn't necessarily fall on top of me to have to provide every time. They just have it, like they're enabled and they're educated on how to do something.
Yeah, but I think it's important also that you're willing to have a suffer period in there, right? Yeah. Because if you just avoid it, right, and you say it's just going to be more practical that I just get this done right now, the longer you avoid it, the longer you need to keep doing this. And then you stack up to your other tasks, right? And at some point you have to say, okay, I'm going to have to let other person do it. In the very first projects, they might not do it like I want them to do it. but eventually I'm building them up to be able to. So you're going to have that 2 or 3 or 4 or 10 like painful projects to go through. So then you can actually delegate, but there's no skipping that, right? You're not going to be able to be like, hey, this is the best brief Asana task of my existence, and you're going to be able to read it and write copy like I do. That's just not going to happen, right? And what's interesting, and this is a good segue to my second question, because I feel like a lot of people that are now managers have been very hands-on marketers before, right? And making that transition is extremely difficult because you just feel like you could just do it. But the tricky thing is that, in startup world, a manager that is hands-on can even be perceived as a plus, right? And a lot of people give you credit and be like, ooh, this guy can like edit video at the same time that he does 1,000 other things. Fine. But in reality, it's extremely ineffective and extremely unproductive, right? Because you need to be the person that get to take a step back and spend significant chunks of time just thinking about what's happening next for the business and strategizing and asking the big questions. If you're every day busy with like audio being clipped on an advertising on Facebook, or like cropping the image different, or like all this little stuff that you used to do before, then you never get to do that thinking. Is this something that you still struggle with, like going into the thinker seat and let the show run?
I don't as much now, but even 3-4 months ago, absolutely.
Oh wow!
And so much of that was because I knew I needed to expand my team again. So I work with 2 contractors now, and technically 3 to 4 depending on the task. But I have 2 consistent contractors now. But before I brought on my second one, I was working with one consistent contractor. But then that extra work that I needed to hire for, I was technically doing. And so I was putting in anywhere from, I would say 70 to 80 hours a week. And it was hands down the most exhausting period of my whole life. But it was incredibly difficult to take a step back and really be that strategic thinker, not for just one company, because like there's DemandMaven, like my business, but then I have to do that same strategic thinking for literally all of my other clients. I'm the lead growth strategist, and I'm thinking growth not just in marketing but across the entire board, and having to do that really strategic work and do that thinking and that just spend some time on my own, answering and ideating, like that work doesn't come easy when you're burdened with tactical stuff. And then you don't have any energy to like think clearly at the end of the day. And especially if you have a family or if you've got other commitments, I particularly don't, but I can imagine like if you're a founder with like kids or in a family and like other things to do, like there's not enough time.
And there's a couple of confusions that happen in startup world, I think. So first of all, like managers confuse very often like being involved with being essential, right? Like it's hard for managers to realize that you can be essential without being involved on every little thing. And also your job as a manager is to make yourself a little bit less essential, right? The show should run if you take 4 months of holidays still. And we confuse being busy with being productive, right? Because people feel like if I just sit for an entire afternoon and doodle on my ideas, right? It's absolutely necessary when you're like managing a team to do that. But then you feel that guilt of like, well, everybody's running around and like doing a lot of tasks, and I'm just sitting here looking at the window trying to come up with whatever comes next. But somebody has to do that, right? So how much of this over busyness addiction or glorification do you see in the companies you work with, right? I feel like companies see like one slot in the calendar and they go like, we could do that in that hour. It's like, you also need some time to like slow down, right? Like you need that. Is that something you see?
I definitely see it in a slightly different way. So the scenario that comes up for me quite often in my client projects is sometimes I do need to be unblocked by the founder in some kind of way. And what I find is there's lots of overcommitment and how fast that will get done. So sometimes it's like, okay, like maybe the website was hard coded and we need to be able to create a landing page. So I need to create, I'm probably going to use like an Instapage or like a Makeswift, for example, to create landing pages or create like a separate website. So that way marketing can be in control of that. And that way we don't have to depend on the founder to make like hard coded edits.
Yeah.
Well, that requires a subdomain. That requires, like, I still need like technical things to happen in the background. Oh yeah, that'll get done tomorrow. But then when we get to our next meeting the next week, it's like, oh, I didn't get to that. I'm sorry. It'll get done. It'll get done this week. And it's like, okay, well, we've lost 2 weeks of progress, and that's okay. But like, let's set the expectation of, I'm not going to get to this week. I'm going to get to it next week. And you know, I'm not someone to you know, be critical or be harsh like when those situations happen. Of course, things come up all the time. But I do think that there's a sense of, there's reality and then there's what I would like to happen, or like the fiction side of it. And the reality is usually what sets in way faster.
Yeah, and also, well, like in everything, right? We try to find formulas that would work. So at some point you pull off a project and you go, well, this way of delegating worked amazing, and I'm just going to use this for every project. And then you realize that this is very people-based, right? And the way you delegate to some people, you cannot delegate to others. Like for some people, a simple, concise instruction will do the trick and they'll handle the rest. To some people, you need to make your expectations extremely clear, and they need to be written down, and they need to be in. So it also changes as you move along with teams. In your case, you take your team with you when you work with other companies, or do you depend on the in-house team quite a lot as well?
So my team is really the first marketing extension. It's actually really rare that I take on a client that already has a marketing team.
Oh, gotcha.
So we really are literally the first marketers that come in. So my team is really focused on delivery. So DemandMaven itself is focused on marketing delivery. We ultimately help execute on the marketing side. As lead strategist, project manager, business owner, I'm obviously responsible for leading that ship and guiding that team, and then also working with the founder on here's the expectations that we can set, and here's where we're ultimately going. Like, here's the trajectory, here's the strategy, here's the plan. But I really depend on the DemandMaven team to help execute. In addition to myself, I also get my hands dirty as well when I really need to. But yeah, we're often the very first marketing team. We're just the outsourced marketing team until they can hire full time.
Do you feel like you're good at saying no? I feel like by nature, I am a little bit of a yes person, which I've talked in this podcast endless times, and I think it's a bit of a flaw, but I've always just related like saying no with like being a dick a little bit, like, and I try to like be nice and be like, hey, yeah, sure, and I end up shooting myself in the foot quite often. Are you good at the hard no, we're not going to do this, or is this something
the boundary setting?
Yep.
I am way better at it now than I was 2 years ago.
Yeah.
So in the early days, and even when I was in-house, it was really hard to set boundaries, and also to set expectation and stick to that, setting the expectation, and to just be like, this is a very hard, it's either a no or it's a not right now or a not yet. And now I'm far more confident in that. But I also find that a lot of that has actually come from setting boundaries before they ever need to come up, setting the expectation before it ever needs to be tested.
Yeah.
And I find that when I do that in the early days in a client engagement, working specifically with the founder, because that's usually the person I'm working with, I set that up front, and usually it doesn't come up again. And if it does, it's a very soft reminder, and then it's a non-issue at that point. Like, it's really just and then sometimes it is something where I say, you know what, this actually does align with our trajectory now, so we can certainly like fit this in or like rearrange this, but there's a trade-off every time, and I make that really clear when there is a trade-off. So like we can reprioritize this project, but just know that this pushes this off the plate. So then it kind of really becomes a discussion around, oh, okay, so I need to respect them and their time, and like if I'm gonna move their cheese, like it's got to be worth it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, you cannot just stack things on top of each other. At some point, you run out of horsepower, right? You need to like remove some things out of the equation. And absolutely. To wrap up this topic a little bit, I wanted to wrap it up. Well, there's a couple of things I've learned, I think, in this topic, and first of all is that your team strengths need to be considered, right? And I think also, if the right person for the task is not on your team, outsourcing is a really valid option, and a lot of people avoid it, and you try to force your team into like being able to do anything. So you're like Facebook ads, you've never done them, but you'll be able to just look at these tutorials or whatever. When sometimes it's just saying, okay, for this stuff, I need to pay another person, right? And you'll get things done much quicker. And the other part is that delegating is not only about asking, it's also about giving, right? You need to give people ownership. You need to give them resources, authority, unblock them from everything in their path to get that done, and not just say, hey, I expect you to get this done. Call me when it's done, right? You need to actually unblock the path for them to go through it. So the second pain you mentioned in our emails was one that I think is also really interesting, is allocating resources wisely, especially in these pandemic times when marketing budgets have increased, but they're not likely to keep increasing for the next few months. Let's see how that evolves. When it comes to allocating resources, especially when you have limited resources because you work with early stage startups, right? And that's usually the norm. It comes a little bit to width versus depth, right? So do you think startups should try to use every available acquisition channel, or should they bet big in just a couple? What is your rule of thumb on that one?
When it comes to early stage, I find that they need to identify what their best bets probably should be, and then after that, try to go one by one if you can. So I think that you ultimately do test many, but I don't think that you're doing it all at the same time. This, I think, also applies to certain growth projects. So it might not necessarily be acquisition channels, but we might decide we're going to change pricing. We're also going to introduce a new plan, and we're going to change our onboarding funnel, and we're going to test this new ad acquisition channel, and we're going to update the website messaging copy. And that is a lot of change across all aspects of the business and the funnel. And I find that when you try to just throw up an entirely new experience all at once, you end up not really knowing, you end up not being able to really solidly identify, increasing the pricing did ultimately increase our revenue, or changing the messaging did ultimately help. So that's the kind of prioritization that doing it all at once I almost never recommend. Usually I try to go a little, one at a time if possible.
Well, I think the temptation to go all in, right, comes from, very often I see, from low volume, right? If you want to test something that requires heavy traffic to be significantly, statistically significant or something, then you're tempted to say, hey, I don't have the luxury of just changing this bit of copy, wait for 4 months, then I change this other copy, wait for 4 months, because it's going to be too slow. I need to just revamp the entire goddamn thing and see what comes out of it. But as you say, I think that's a problem, right? I've been in that position before, and I have fallen down that path where you're like, okay, if this actually goes better, I will have no clue what made it better, but I just needed to ramp up significantly, and I cannot wait for every little test. Do you also face that with the companies you work with, or do you still stick to one thing at a time?
Yeah, it is such a. This is where I would say I do think it depends on what the experiment or the activity is, because here's what's interesting. I believe in big swings. I believe if we know that the website isn't performing well, let's completely overhaul it and go for a completely different big swing. This is usually recommended from conversion rate experts in general, because you're just more likely to learn from doing a big swing than doing a really nuanced change when you don't have a whole lot of traffic volume, for example, or there's not a whole lot of volume in general. But I do find that when it comes to changing many different things across the entire business, that's where I would say, okay, you don't have to do it all at once, but let's phase this approach. And one of these is likely directly connected to the next. So we can actually prioritize these projects based off of what we think is likely to net out. That's where I would say ordering that and kind of piecing it out over time is way more effective, and also gives you more confidence. And I think that's the other thing that's really critical for founders as well. But when it comes to really detailed things within a particular function or a channel, like the market messaging on the website, big swing. Especially when you've got low volume, there's not a whole lot to lose.
Absolutely. When you talk about allocating resources, one of the part that's interesting is what your success criteria looks like, right? Early stage startups tend to have really short runways, so they are very ROI focused, right? They're I put a penny here, I want to get $1 out. That's the way you always think for everything. But we know as marketers that there are some initiatives to require to build a brand, right? Or that will not have a positive return in the short term, right? So, and sometimes that requires to keep betting on them and be patient until you actually see the benefit of that and just trust your gut. Being a consultant, you also have the dilemma that, people hire you and hopefully you can show return right away. So you want to grab all the low hanging fruits and show I did this and I changed something so you can get credibility within the organization and whatnot. So how do you deal with that? Do you still do big bets on things that you believe in, even though they don't pay short term and you have to explain them? Or are you like, if this channel is not ROI positive, in 2 weeks I'll kill it? What's your... I guess it depends on the business, of course, right? But yeah, that's a dilemma.
That's an excellent question. I do agree that there is this layer, and it's the contextual layer of the business and the industry that they're in. But I'm very much the kind of consultant that I don't expect to work with any client for many years. And that might sound very like nail in the coffin kind of thing. Well, like, why would we bring you on? But my whole mission and the whole approach of DemandMaven is to set you up for success. And we typically work with clients anywhere from, on average, I would say about 6 months to a year, but the goal is never to be this long-term agency. Like, we get in, we land, and we expand, and we're like, you're stuck with us for years.
Yeah.
It's really much more, we come in, we enable, we help you put all of the right strategic things in place, and we actually help you get used to executing, because usually founders are afraid to execute. They're scared because they don't know what they don't know, so they're terrified by marketing and executing on it. So our real mission is actually far more on the let's overcome fear and let's get you the things that you actually need. So I say all that to say, my approach is very much, I approach it as if I were the CMO and I were a full-time employee, knowing that I'm actually not, and I'm going to phase out at some point in our engagement. But that said, if I were to make investments now, knowing that they'll pay off in 6 months to a year, I'm going to recommend those investments. Of course, we have projects that show short-term wins. But when it comes to what's the best for the founder and the business, we always go for the business. We go for what's going to be absolutely the best for the business. And usually founders are bought into that as well. And it's one of those expectations I set in the early days. We're not going to be the team that you hire and 10x revenue in 3 months. That's just not us. We're going to be, it's possible, don't get me wrong. We've done the 3x thing before. We're much more the team to hire because you want to live for the next 5 years. That's really the way that we position that.
Yeah. Yeah, because it holds pretty much true still today, right? And I think it will forever, that a solid brand is the only long-term competitive advantage that you can truly have, right? Because channels come and go, they get saturated. If you depend on any of that, you're going to be having a hard time. And building a brand, by definition, it just takes time, right?
Yes.
And it's expensive at the same time.
Yes.
Right? So you need to put the money, you need to just have faith on it and then just bet on it. So that one's tricky. So another thing is incentives. And I think it's very related to allocating budget, because what makes the employee look good is not necessarily always what's good for the company in the long term, right? Therefore, designing incentives, it's really important. If you judge a Google search marketer only on the conversion of their campaigns, they may be inclined to say, okay, I'll just turn off all the mobile campaigns, because those don't convert really well. And then all of these countries, I'll just turn them off and just leave this country that converts really well, and I'll make my boss really happy. I'm going to show them a 25% conversion rate, whatever it is. But that's not really good for the business, because you're wasting a lot of market and a lot of visibility that the business actually wants that might not show, right? So as an experienced marketer, we'll still allocate resources and keep an eye on the big picture, but explaining that to the CFO or the CEO is not always easy, right? Have you found trouble with incentives in the companies you've worked with, right? Because or within your team, right? Internally, right? Maybe you might be saying, well, to impress Asia, the best thing is that I show her great traffic here, and you just pull off a little tweak that will bring great traffic, but that is a spontaneous oomph that will not go anywhere. Have you faced that within your team, or do you feel everybody keeps an eye on the big picture?
Yeah. We don't. I would say the businesses that I work with today are so small. They are literally 1 to 3 employees on the client side, and that's full-time employees. And I think maybe the largest team I've ever worked with was probably closer to 15 full-time employees, very early stage. So I find incentives are actually very rarely part of the conversation. It's usually much more like, how do we not die?
I can imagine.
Like that's the real
sense.
conversation. But I will say, in terms of how we, this actually segues into OKRs a little bit, because I will say that we do, when it comes to like motivating and inspiring around growth, we actually do use OKRs. And that I would say, I mean, it's not quite so much like an incentive of like, you'll get this if you achieve these goals. But we do leverage OKRs to motivate, inspire. Because I work with mostly contractors, they don't have OKRs, but they know what the client's OKRs are. Like they are educated on, like they know what the ultimate mission is for one client versus another. And it's to increase traffic here, or to even just prove out a cost per lead model. Like not even like, let's get 100, leads from this one channel. It's just, can we just prove it? Like, can we prove that it works? So they're usually incredibly versed in terms of like, what does the client need to accomplish to win? What does success look like? But in terms of like pure incentives, I would say, we really don't do a whole lot of it, but just because, the carrot that we dangle at the end of the stick is really survival.
Yeah.
And then overcoming that, then we can start talking about what thriving looks like. And now we can start using incentives to motivate in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've always believed, and I know this is very controversial with people that are careful with money, but I've always believed that to do something truly original in marketing, right? Like not another gated ebook, not another whatever thing that we all do as best practices, but just something truly original. You need to feel comfortable with a chunk of your money going in a place that you will not judge by its direct attributed ROI, right? Going in a place that you'll be like, I'll just spend this money and see if the results overall come from this, but I won't be nitpicking about like this precise deal came from this video or came from this activation or from whatever.
Right.
I know you work with early stage startups, but is this something that you also do in this practice? Are there some things that you just say like, hey, this is gonna boost everything else we're doing, but I will not obsess about attributing to this one specific ROI? Because I find like, whenever you close a deal these days, people are like, where exactly did it come from? Right?
Yeah.
Like where is every single touch point? And then you have these fights about, oh, no, this one was all sales. Well, was it? Mm-hmm. Like they read the ebook. Oh yeah, but we told them about the ebook, right? Do you have some channels where you just go, I'll just spend here?
Yeah. So this is another one of those scenarios where, honestly, I would say that's like 100% of the channels that we end up turning on and experimenting and testing.
That's great.
but it's very, so again, like the way that we describe the effort is that really all of this is an experiment. Because one thing that we are not in control of is we're not in control of product market fit. Like there is no amount of dollars I can throw at a channel that's going to guarantee that someone comes through and buys instantly. So usually whenever we talk about paid acquisition or really any activity, there are some that we have really strong bets to place on, and it's because of customer research and exercises like that give us that confidence, and we know that that's a good short-term and long-term bet to make. But then there's others that are very much an experiment, very much a test. We don't necessarily know what kind of results this is going to generate, but in order for us to learn, we have to invest about this much per month for the next 3 to 6 months, and then we'll really know if this channel panned out the way that we thought, or if there's actually another implication somewhere else in the business that is blocking that channel from success. Google Ads is hands down the most common example of this. Part of that is because it can be a very high intent channel based off of the keywords that you bid on. But Google Ads, and this is something I explain to founders all the time, but Google Ads is great at getting you traffic. It does not care about what happens post-click. So after someone clicks, yes, like you can optimize for conversions and Google's going to do whatever, voodoo it does to figure that out, but it's not responsible for your funnel. Like it's not responsible for the copy on your page.
And in an early stage startup with the volumes, that optimization for conversion is going to be awful anyway. Right. You don't have the volume.
And on top of that,
Yeah.
And sometimes they don't have the budget either. Like if you really want to optimize for Google Ads, you've got to be spending at least like $3,000 a month, in whatever currency of your choosing. But that's kind of the that's an example of when we pitch channels in that way, we know, generally speaking, like what a diversified marketing strategy looks like across different channels. So you want something that's paid, you want something that's organic, you want something high intent, low intent, etc. But when it comes to like investing in certain things, for early stage, at least, a lot of that's an experiment. All of it is. And that's really how we pitch it. Like there are really no silver bullets or guarantees about what's going to come on the other end. But if we do our jobs right, we'll learn a lot. And also, if we do it really right, we'll see some pretty impressive results.
Yeah. And what's interesting is also the opportunity cost, right? Like you're like, okay, sure, we don't do these ads, then we don't spend that money. But other people are there. And other people are taking the top of the search engine results, right? And they are taking your business, which you don't get to measure, but they are, right? So there's also a tricky part there. But you just mentioned product market fit, and that's a perfect segue into topic number 3, right? So thank you for cutting it out for me. So struggling with product market fit. I recently, it's cool that you mentioned this because we were just talking about Rand Fishkin, and he wrote one of the most interesting blog posts about it recently in SparkTour's blog, challenging the concept. And he lays out how we talk about it like it's an objective metric and something we can measure with certainty when it's just simply not the case. And we're saying things like, hey, before we reach product market fit, this is what we're going to do. And right after we nail it, we're going to go with that. And then we have no freaking clue when we reached it because there's nothing that goes in like a light in the office that says, hey, you just reached product market fit, right? That doesn't exist. He puts it like it's more like a feeling than a standardized metrics. And I can definitely, I've always thought the same thing. I think it's very true. How do you personally assess this when deciding to take a new client or not? Because it's already hard to do that when you're in the business full time.
Yeah. I love this question because, and also just overall topic, because I definitely agree with Rand in some cases, and in others I disagree. But just because of the kinds of businesses that I work with, early stage is a big, like, that's a big category. When I say early stage, I really mean like 0 to that 100K NMR, and really that 0 to 10K NMR. A lot of businesses that I work with, they're usually either around the 10K and they're trying to get to the first 100, or they're starting like really small. Product market fit, I completely agree that it's more of a feeling. There are some metrics and KPIs that you can use. And that's actually where I start, because with a new client, I don't necessarily have the feeling of being in the business and trying to sell to these people or trying to market to these people. So I don't necessarily have that feeling yet. But I start with a few KPIs. The first core sets of things that I analyze and look at are, and assuming that the prospect is going to be really transparent with me, which is already a non-starter if they're not. So if they don't want to tell me any of their, like, how the business is performing, it's already like a non-starter, like we can't work together. But their churn has to be relatively healthy, like it's got to be less than 5%. I'm using numbers based off of SaaS, by the way. So, and ideally self-serve, but they've got to be converting anywhere from that 15 to 30% of new free trials or incoming accounts. If they're freemium, at least 3%. And then the last thing is cohort retention. So their churn might be okay, but are they retaining their cohorts of at least 50% after the first 6 months to a year? And then finally, what does their LTV look like? And that just really tells me more than anything what channels we're probably going to be looking at. Their LTV tells me a lot about, can we invest in paid? Can we not? Or is it ill-advised? But those are the numbers that give me like the general sense. Something that we've added to that formula, though, is actually more on the market end. So now whenever we take on new clients, we used to not do this, but now we do. Now whenever we take on new clients, we actually analyze the competitor websites and we see how much traffic they get.
Yeah.
Because that tells us how big
the TAM is in general.
Kind of that. And then also, like, is the digital world active? Like, are people searching for this?
Yeah.
Are they... And even that, I would say, does not necessarily give us a strong sense of product market fit, but it does give us a sense of activity. Because the hardest thing to come in and do is obviously go into a business. They might have relatively healthy numbers, but then you kind of get in and you realize, like, oh, this market's actually tiny, and getting a new customer is going to be pulling teeth. And so and it's not necessarily like so much of a product market fit as a traction. Like traction is going to be hard.
What about, because you mentioned that sometimes they don't want to disclaim like their numbers, but also sometimes they have no freaking clue what their numbers look like, right? Like I can imagine that the range of companies you're talking, right? Like I've worked with a lot of companies that are much bigger than that don't have their stuff together when it comes to their metrics. I can imagine a 10K, 50K MRR company has no freaking clue what their cohort retention looks like. When that's the case and you don't have access to like backdated data or something, then that puts you a little bit on a blind faith position, doesn't it?
Yeah. Those are usually the businesses that we say, come back to us in 6 months after you implement subscription analytics.
Yeah.
But I would say it's actually rarer these days. Products like Baremetrics and ProfitWell and ChartMogul, like that, it's made it really easy and kind of inexcusable now to not have it. But I would say it still comes up every now and again. Even if they're measuring things in a spreadsheet, that's usually enough to start. But yeah, if they're not using something, then usually it's like a come back to us later.
Yeah, and it's
after
funny
you get clarity,
because you just mentioned two people that were in this podcast before: Patrick from ProfitWell and 𝐸𝐸𝐺 from ChartMogul were recently in the podcast. So that's really cool. The other one is this is one is like a little bit of a particular rant of mine. So many people preach the mantra of like, hey, no product market fit, then don't bother about doing marketing or hiring a growth person, right? Like it's like don't even bother before you even have this basic requirement to like do anything. To be honest, it sounds a little bit to me like a little bit of an excuse that marketers use as well, because sure, product market fit is necessary to ramp up growth significantly. I get that. But also early stage companies in particular bringing in people like you and I precisely to turn that around, right? Precisely to create that, right? Because it's not just there. You need to create it as well with your messaging, your marketing and everything. So it feels a little bit like a lot of people want to take the easy way out. Like a lot of people say, well, I'm not going to join a company unless they're in hyper growth mode. Then I get there, I sit on my ass and I just grow. Right. Yeah. But somebody has to do the dirty stuff. Somebody has to take that company that's not there yet and push them there and so on. Okay. So it's much easier and better for your career to take the other road, because you're going to be in companies that all of them are hyper growth and so on. And a lot of that is going to be attributed to you, even if you just happen to be there, right? And it's much more or less rewarding in the public spectrum, but maybe more in the learnings, to take the other road of taking that company that is just not there and you get them from 0 to 1. When you pick clients, do you like limit it to like only companies you kind of know you can succeed with? Or do you also go in like, oh, this one's going to be really challenging, but I'm going to give it a go.
So from a consultant perspective, we try to pick projects that we know that we're going to be able to make a big difference at. And making a big difference is really defined by we're either achieving results for them that we're going to be really proud of, or we're helping them learn something and unblock them so much that they can confidently move forward and not have really any not that they won't necessarily have any doubts or fears anymore. It's just they recognize them and they know how to overcome them. So those kinds of projects are huge wins for us.
Yeah.
Personally, however, I don't know if you're into like personality types and like all that.
Yeah.
On the Enneagram, I'm a 3. I'm the achiever, which means that I am very attracted to opportunities that I know that I can just like come in and kill it at. When I have been able to identify that, I'm like the first one to say like, I know I can do a good job here. I want that project.
Yeah.
Usually when the projects come around that I do think are going to be really challenging, it's usually an indicator that I'm not the right fit, actually. And what I mean by that is, a prospect actually just came through my pipeline, and they run a SaaS company that, big. They're targeting big enterprise. They're still in the beta phase. They don't have any paying customers today. They're in the process of raising funding, but they want me to come in and help with like the messaging and the marketing, like they want to get started now, even though they're pre-product technically, or no, I guess they're post-product. They're in the beta phase. So originally I was like, man, I know I could come in and kill it. But where they're at, it would actually be really challenging for me to come in and make a big difference, because between now and 6 months from now, their minds are going to change a billion times, right? Like they're going to learn a lot of stuff. They're going to like change their minds, pivot, and like try this and try that. And I am very much someone who, I just know that like bringing me on now probably wouldn't be smart, but just purely because like they still have to figure their stuff out.
Yeah.
But I know I could come in and make like just completely change, and like really help them a lot and help them learn a lot. So I play it by ear, I find. But typically whenever I come across those kinds of situations where it's like, oh, this is going to be really hard, should I do it?
You tend to avoid them.
I tend to avoid them, but only because I just know that it's going to take more than just me. Like it's going to probably take them building a sales arm. It's going to take them investing more in the tech or changing like product direction. And from a consultant perspective, it's not that we can't mitigate that change. It's just that you're going to invest in someone like me, but only to might not get the best result. And so that's kind of where I shy away from those.
No, that's true. That's true. I think that's there's a little bit of like, like trying to avoid those challenges because you don't want to have the challenge. And there's also a little bit of like, well, it's not even the best for the client, right? It's just not even the best for me to come in at this point. So that makes sense. This takes us to the fourth pain that you sent me, which I think is very related to it, which is achieving consistent results. You said different clients, but I changed it to companies. So it's also useful for people in-house because I think, people change jobs today every year or every 2 years. So everybody's pretty much a consultant these days, I guess. So, but what's interesting is that with the proliferation of growth hacking, right? And marketers becoming more like public figures, let's say like on LinkedIn, right? And you're like, everybody's an influencer sort of thing, like this podcast and everybody has a podcast and all this kind of stuff. I feel like there's also an excessive focus on the individuals leading teams and leading marketing and growth teams. And companies tend to assume that somebody who grew a business from 100K in MRR to 10 million can just do that again, right? He has it in him or in her, right? They can just do it again. This has become a major blocker for companies to not even give a chance to come to people because they don't have that little tick box in their CV, right? It's like, oh, you're really smart, but you haven't been in a company with 250K MRR to 5 million. So then no, right? Because that should be like the thing we're looking for. And sure, to an extent, having a good professional will always make a difference. But in your opinion, what I'm interested in is how much of business growth really comes down to the individual leading the growth team or being the face of it versus just sort of right place, right time, perfect product. You were just sitting there. Like...
It is definitely, at least to me, extremely shades of gray. Like it's not black and white. Like it's not just like, oh, I'm going to hire this person and I'm going to like see these results and get this kind of get this thing. It is so much more the machine in its entirety and all of the elements of that machine. The best thing you can do is hire great people and also make sure that you have a great product and a great business. And even that is saying, like I'm saying, make sure that you can do that, but that's even very much in some ways out of your control and in other ways in your control. So much of it does have to do with just the nuance and like what's going on in the market and the people you have, the products you have, the customers you're targeting, all of that. It all plays in together. What I think is really interesting is, personally speaking, I'm definitely one of those marketers that I technically haven't I say by myself in finger quotes, but like I technically haven't taken a company to hundreds of millions of dollars. Yeah. And it's one of those things where I think it's really easy to attribute, not to diminish anyone's success or like what they've accomplished, but it's so easy to attribute like, oh, just she did that, or like it wasn't anything else. It was just that one person. It's so easy to do that. And that's, again, not to diminish anyone's accomplishments. Of course, there are people who know exactly how to accomplish something. Yeah. What I think is really interesting is, going back to product market fit and going back to just how the business is currently operating, the culture even, so much of these things can sabotage that person's ability to execute and perform anyway. And so
Exactly.
it's like, you can hire this like rock star person and they probably know exactly what to come in and do. But if they're not set up for success, if there are things that, obviously impact that person's ability to perform, then you're not gonna see the same thing.
But that's exactly my point, right? It's not about taking down the people that have succeeded. It's about also understanding that those who haven't had the lack of finding that success, it's not only based on their abilities, right? I think that this kind of like thinking of like, I need to achieve consistent results, right? It's undermining, in a way, the fact that it's not really 100% up to you. It's probably not even 70% up to you, right? There's a lot of things that you just don't control. Like, a lot of people might have a perfect job and then the freaking coronavirus came and it all goes down the toilet, right? Like,
exactly.
There's so many things you don't control, and that's important. And we humans like to feel we're in control. I know you're interested in psychology, and that's clearly a thing that is true. So we like to think that if we take our skills to a certain level, we'll be able to consistently do that and deliver it, right? And for many people, you find your path and things align and the gods are there for you and you get there, right? But for some that have just as the same qualifications and have been really, really good workers or really good at their craft, it doesn't pay out, right? So this can lead, and this is also the reason I started this podcast in a way, this can lead to a lot of mental issues, right? And mental health issues, right? Have you been down that train of being... I'm not cut out for this. It was my fault. I didn't do it, and start like whipping your back. And have you been down that train of like thinking that success just didn't happen because you were not 100% for it when it actually, it was not up to you?
I am so glad you asked that. Absolutely. So there's like a really specific scenario that I'll try to talk about without giving away what it was. But there was a role that I had previously back when I was in house, so before DemandMaven. So for context, my background has been in marketing for SaaS for, I would say, the past, I guess 6 years now, maybe 5 years. That's not a super long time, I think, in retrospect, but in startup world, it definitely is.
Yeah, it's a lifetime.
Yeah, it feels like one. Whole career has been in marketing, but definitely the past 5 or 6 years, I've been focused on SaaS and startups. And there was a role that I had where, I mean, just from a context perspective, I was really young. I think I was like 26 or so. And, bright, excited, couldn't wait to, do the thing and get in and prove myself and get a whole bunch of results and then be amazing. And there were some circumstances that were far beyond my control, like so far out of my control that there really wasn't any way that I could have won. And to be honest, I didn't know that at the time. I didn't realize it while I was in it. When I was in it, I was just like, nothing is coming to fruition. Everything seems like it's against me. I'm disappointing my boss. I'm disappointing my colleagues. They probably think that I'm just all talk and no action, which personally, being an achiever, also absolutely hate. That's
right in the heart. Yeah.
Right in the gut. No, I do the thing too. And it took me years, honestly. It was a very traumatic experience, being in that environment and being so, oblivious to the fact that there were just things that I wasn't going to be able to control. But the unfortunate thing was that I did end up taking all the blame for it. I just kind of assumed it was my fault. And my self-worth tanked. I think I was the most just paranoid and suspect person for months after that. And it was very traumatic. It took me a while to realize that wasn't my fault. Yeah. And also it also wasn't the end of the world, was the other part. But it didn't have anything to do with me. And I think that was it's a truth I'm still accepting in a way and healing from it. I'm still healing from it years from that point in my life. And absolutely to say,
and even when you overcome it, you can come back to it, right? It just takes a bad experience where you feel like it was you and your fault, but you were coming back to the topic. As a marketer, we try to market ourselves, right? So that's part of our job. So you want your value proposition to like be, hey, reach out to me. I'll grow your business fast, 100% guaranteed, right? Like that's the dream, right? Like, oh,
Yeah.
whenever you get me in,
10x.
I'll go 10x for you. And that's the thing, right? Which also puts a lot of pressure. How do you find balance between, keeping that up? Because you can also not be like on your website, average marketer, great person, but I'm not sure I can grow your business, right? You can also not go to the other extreme. You have to at some point like market yourself. How do you find a balance that you're comfortable with saying, I'm the person to call, you need to get me in there and I'll fix it, but also giving it a tiny bit of like, if things work out, right? Like how do you find that balance in both in your value prop and also in your communication with your prospect clients, right?
Yeah. I'll start with personally, like how I mentally and emotionally manage that. And then also external, like how does that translate to the external in terms of like what I say and what I do? I have, and it's something I'm still mastering to this day. I don't know that you can ever be a master of it, but I am very much focusing on detachment when it comes to self-worth and the results I achieve for my clients, future in-house opportunities, what have you. Even joining the board, for example, at Moz, as excited and thrilled and just over the moon as I was, I also kind of had to have that moment of Moz's success. As much as I will fight for it tooth and nail every single day, it's not going to define me or who I am, which is a very, it's setting that personal self-care and psychological boundary, because otherwise, whatever Moz does, that could make my own self-worth incredibly overinflated or completely deflated based off of where it goes. Same thing for clients. Same thing also for in-house roles previously, especially after some of my early experiences in startups. So that's how I've personally viewed it now. So now I am mastering that art of detachment. That
one small thing I want to add to that, because
Sure.
I think it's a really important topic. But I think a lot of people, because I think this detachment is two-sided. One of it is that on your own internal thinking, you detach yourself from it so you keep a healthier mind, and that's okay. Mm-hmm. But there's also people that take it one step further, maybe Rand being one of them, right? Where you just also blurb it out and you just put it all over and you just say, hey, very happy with this success. Not really my doing. A lot of people were involved, and you actually become more honest about it openly. Are you also, you think, because I said to Rand as well when he was on the show, I was like, well, it's easy for you now because you have nothing to lose, right? Like you have a brand already that people respect, so you can say, yeah, I fucked up, and people will be like, okay, right? But when you're starting out or when you're younger, that's a bit tougher because people want to hear, yeah, I'm hot stuff, I'm here to deliver the growth, right? So do you also feel comfortable with putting it out, or is it more of an internal thing for you still? Well, this is part of it, but
Yeah, I would say I definitely feel comfortable speaking candidly about some of those like harder moments. I will say where I'm. With all, of course, love and respect. I think that's the only, real big difference. And even now, like whenever I talk about some of my horror stories, as I'm sure all marketers and founders do when it comes to these kinds of experiences, even now, I only ever want to tell some of those horror stories from a place of love and healing, of course, and also a don't do this because I made this mistake and don't ever, like, if you can't help it, don't do it. Or if you're going to, at least know the repercussions here. So I will say I definitely feel super comfortable being candid. For me, it's just much more about how can I still tell this hard, awful story, but it still heal something for someone else or release someone from something else. Because I think that my experiences historically, some of them were extremely positive and some of them were just awful. And I think we all kind of have, especially, in SaaS and startup world where things do move at the speed of light, and you are building a parachute as you're falling out of the plane. So that's I guess like my approach. But going back to your other question though, about like, how does that translate into how do I communicate that detachment, and how do I communicate that I'm going to manage your expectations of like, listen, the 10x, the whole like story of like the 10x and like the 10% growth month over month or whatever that is that you're trying to accomplish, like that is only possible if XYZ things happen. And then from there, I kind of paint here's what I'm in control of. Here's everything I'm not in control of.
Yeah.
And so when I'm able to illustrate that, it makes it really clear, like, oh, okay, this is directly within our control and this is directly not in our control. It's considered an opportunity or a threat or a risk at that point. So using like your risk management skills,
yeah,
I think also really helps a lot with this.
And you learned that the hard way, right? I can imagine you learned that the hard way with like over-promising and setting crazy targets and stuff like that. So it's a really cool way to start wrapping this up, because we need to get you need to get going with your days at the end of the day in Amsterdam, but you still have a lot of stuff to do. So the last bit of this is resources. Usually I ask people to share a couple of resources. Is there anything you'd like to share with the audience?
Yeah. There's a few things. The one is actually publicly available, and the second is coming. But the first is, I actually also have a podcast as well. Yes. It's called the In Demand Podcast. So if you wanted to hear more about how I think about growth, marketing, specifically within the SaaS setting, whether you're a founder or a marketer, either one, that would be a great resource in addition to just the DemandMaven.io blog. And then the resource that does not exist yet, that is coming soon. I honestly can't decide if I want to launch it like nowish or next year. So apologies for not having a hard date on when that's going to come out. But I have been asked to productize / create a course of my growth road mapping sessions. So a while back, I did a growth road mapping session for Earnest Capital, and I got a lot of great feedback about it. So much so that a lot of people wanted to be able to take it like a course, like at any time they can come in and roadmap their growth. That is actually something that is in the works. It is either going to come out, I think, at the end of this year. It could also actually just be 2021, because 2020 is honestly a wash. Yeah. But I would say if you keep up with me on Twitter, on DemandMaven.io, you'll absolutely hear about it when it is live.
That's a really interesting one, because in general, that's a thing that a lot of people struggle with. Trying to have more of a longer term vision on how you plan your growth. It's all experiments, but you need to have a longer term strategy. So that's super interesting.
Right.
Anything else you want to add to that list?
I think that's it.
I actually was going to recommend your own YouTube channel, because I think it's also really interesting.
Oh, yeah.
And I also want to recommend to people Rand's article, The Product Market Fit is Broken Concept and There's a Better Way. I think, as you say, there are things there to agree and things to disagree. But overall, I think it's really bold to just challenge a concept that's so engraved on people's mind. It's one of those concepts that people just repeat like a broken record without even thinking of it, because everybody has told you so. Therefore, I'm just going to go along and just keep spreading it. But when you actually think about it, you're like, holy shit. Yeah, this is weird, right? And there's a lot of things that don't add up there. So I kudos to him for that one. And yeah, we're starting to wrapping it up. Thank you so much, Asia, for being here. I really appreciate it. And yeah, hopefully we can keep in touch.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Bye, everybody. Talk to you soon.
Growth Pains.